Hey, first graders, it's Miss Bale again, and we're going to read another book today. I know the last couple of weeks we've been reading some books from David Shannon or by David Shannon, and we're going to do the same thing this week. We're going to read another really good book by David Shannon. The first week we read together Alice the Fairy, and then I know last week you got to read with Miss Dickinson, and you guys read A Bad Case of Stripes. And I hope you enjoyed both of those books, and I think you'll enjoy this one just as much, okay? David Shannon, he's a really great author, and his books, Know David, are really, really good. I know you guys love those books. But he has written a lot of other really good books too, and that's why we want to make sure that you guys get to hear some of his other books. So today we're going to read the book called Jangles, A Big Fish Story. And I don't know about you, but if I look at the front cover of our story, I can take a pretty good guess that first of all, Jangles is probably this character right here, the fish, because it's called Jangles, A Big Fish Story. So that makes me think that maybe this is Jangles. And because we see Jangles, or we see this big fish so big on the front part of our cover, that tells me that he probably is going to be a main character in our story. So the story is probably going to be mostly about him, and it's going to have something to do about a fish story. So I've read this book before, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview. So what we're going to do is you guys are going to actually think about what the moral is in this story. And so if you remember before we went on our break, we read some Dr. Seuss books. And Dr. Seuss is a really good author, but he's also really good at putting a moral in a story. So remember, a moral is the lesson of the story. So what does the author want to teach you in the story? What are they trying to teach you through the story and through the characters? And this one is going to have a really good moral as well. So let me give you a little preview. So this book is about a fish and a story that a guy is actually going to tell us about our fish Jangles. So we're going to see what happens in the story and what it's all about. It's really interesting. Okay, but remember, you're going to be thinking about what is the moral of the story. So what is David Shannon trying to teach you through the characters and the story? So Jangles, A Big Fish Story. So if you notice, he did something really cool. David Shannon did something really cool with the word Jangles right here. Now you may look at those and go, that looks kind of weird, but if you've ever been fishing, now I've never been fishing before, but I do know that these are the hooks. And so you put the bait on there, whatever it is that you're trying to get the fish to eat, and you put it on the hook, and then that gets the fish on the hook so that you can reel him in. And so I think that's really cool that David Shannon made that Jangles word out of hooks. It makes me think that maybe hooks is going to have something to do, or an important part of our story. And I know Miss Dickinson mentioned it last week in A Bad Case of Stripes, how she knows that a book is maybe written by David Shannon because he kind of makes the characters, when he draws them, look very similar with the round faces. I think that's kind of interesting that he did that again here in this story. All right, so let's see what happens in Jangles, A Big Fish Story by David Shannon. When the sun goes down and the weather's just right, Big Lake gets smooth as glass, and a thin mist whispers across it. That's when you might catch a glimpse of Jangles. My father told me lots of stories, but my favorite was about a giant trout he saw when he was a kid. I still remember sitting with him in front of the big stone fireplace at the cabin. He pulled out a dirty green tackle box and shook it a couple of times so it rattled. Then he told me this story. So what David Shannon is doing is this character is getting ready to tell us a story that he heard from his father. So we're going to get to hear that story that his father told him. And it's going to be probably about a fish. Oh, look at that. Oh my goodness. Look at all those hooks. See, that tells me that must have something to do, a big part of our story, an important part. When I was a kid, Jangles was the biggest fish anyone had ever seen or heard. That's right. You could hear Jangles. He'd broken so many fishing lines that his huge crooked jaw was covered with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. They clinked and clattered as he swam. That's why he was called Jangles. So that tells me that jangle must mean like when you have metal and it like hits each other and it makes that noise. So they called him Jangles because all of those fish hooks were stuck in his mouth and he made noise when he swam. Jangles was so big, he ate eagles from the trees that hung out over the lake and full-grown beavers that strayed too far from home. But he didn't seem to care much for the taste of kids. In fact, people swear one time Jangles saved a baby who fell into the lake when his family's canoe tipped over. They say he took that baby up so gently that none of the hooks even stuck it, and he swam it to shore. Supposedly, he gave the baby's mama a dirty look as if to say, "What are you doing bringing your precious little baby out here in a tippy old canoe?" Everyone wanted to catch Jangles. They held big tournaments with lots of prize money, but no one could bring him in. He was too smart and too strong, and he lived too deep down in the middle of the lake. They tried all sorts of tricks, like using whole turkeys for bait. So Jangles must have been a pretty popular fish and people knew about him. They wanted to catch him and see him. Oh my goodness. Wow, we'll see what happened here. One fellow even tried dynamite. He threw big cans of tuna fish in the water and waited till he heard Jangles coming. Then he lit a stick of dynamite and tossed it in the lake. I don't know if it hit a rock or something, but that dynamite came flying back out of the water and into his boat and blew it to smithereens. Then he had to swim all the way back to his dock. He said Jangles came up and bumped him on his butt, but nobody believed him. It's kind of a silly story. One time when I was just about your age, I was fishing over where the creek comes into the lake, and my anchor came loose. I was concentrating so hard on catching a fish that I didn't notice I was drifting way out into the middle of the lake. There wasn't another soul out there, and it was getting dark. So when it says there wasn't another soul out there, that just means another person. So like a soul is kind of another name for like a person or a human. Just when I realized where I was, I felt a tug on my line. Not a real big tug, but something was on the other end. I started to reel it in. It was wiggling all right, but it didn't really feel like a fish. I finally got it in, and what do you know? I'd snagged an old fishing rod that somebody must have dropped out of a boat a long time ago. I started to reel in that one too. I cranked and finally felt the end of it getting closer to the surface. Then I heard a sound that made my whole body feel all prickly. It was kind of soft at first. Tangle, dingle. But then it started getting louder. Tingle, jingle, jangle. Now, I used to daydream all the time about catching Jangles, but right then I was scared to death. Just when I saw the lure on the end of the line, a gigantic shadow came out of the deep darkness and swallowed it up. I think maybe he's talking about this. My rod bent nearly in half. I was hanging on to it like it was my first dollar when Jangles suddenly swam under the boat and pulled me right over the side and into the cold black lake. Down we went like a crazy horse and buggy. Pretty soon, I noticed I could still breathe and the water wasn't cold anymore. So I think this for sure is telling me this is a fictional book, right? Because you can't really breathe under the water. Humans can't do that. So this tells me this story is fiction, or at least the story that his dad is telling him. Finally, we came to a cave in the deepest part of the lake. It was decorated with parts of old boats and lots of rods and reels. "This is my home," said Jangles. "It's been a long time since I had a visitor." His voice was so low and soothing, it seemed perfectly natural that this fish was talking. So I wasn't afraid at all. Then Jangles told me stories. Amazing, wonderful stories about the beginning of the earth before there were people. And stories about wise old redwood trees and animals who were silly, and the great fish that lived before him in Big Lake. It was like Jangles was my magic uncle. After a while, I started to get sleepy, and he said, "Time to go." He told me to hang on to the big fin on his back. I still had the old rod in my hand, and as we swam up and the water turned from black to purple, I slowly pulled out some line and made a bunch of long loops. When we reached the surface, Jangles swam alongside my boat. Quick as a minnow, I hopped off the fish's giant back and threw the coils of line around him. Then, with a sharp yank, I spun him upside down. Now, you might not know this, but when you turn a fish upside down, even a big, old, smart fish like Jangles, it gets confused and can't hardly move, like it's paralyzed. And paralyzed means that, and they kind of told you in the text, that it means that you can't move. "Gotcha!" I shouted. Jangles just lay there, but he could still talk. "You tricked me," he cried. "I told you secrets from the beginning of time, and this is how you thank me?" "You are a fish," I said, "and I have caught you." "Set me free," Jangles urged. "I am more than a fish. I am a storyteller and a story." "A story no one will believe if I let you go," I replied. Then Jangles asked me, "Is that more important than doing what is right?" I don't know about you, but I think it's starting to get into the moral of the story, so let's see if he does what's right. I thought of all the wondrous things I'd heard that day. Then I thought about people dragging whole turkeys around the lake. "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry. I will set you free. But what can I do to apologize?" I swear Jangles grinned at me with that big, crooked, jingling jaw of his. "There is one thing you can do to help me," he said, "and it would also prove you caught old Jangles." Ooh. So take a second and think about, what do you think it is that Jangles told him to do that would set Jangles free so he could go back in the water, but people would still believe the guy that he actually caught Jangles. So what do you think it was? If you need to, pause the button, click the pause button and see if you can tell somebody what you predict. What do you think it was that Jangles told him to do? All right, so let's see if you guys were right. Look at the picture. Oh my goodness. What do we see? Look, it's all the hooks that we saw at the very beginning on the title page. So that tells me, before I even read the text, that I think what Jangles wanted him to do was to take all of the hooks out of his mouth. So then he's not only helping Jangles, but now he's got proof that he caught Jangles. So let's see if we were right. That's when my dad stopped telling his story and gave me his tackle box. It was full to the top with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. He never told anyone about catching the giant fish. He kept it a secret until that night when he told me. And now I'm telling you. Oh my goodness, what a great story. So his father decided to tell him the story about Jangles one night, and then his son, who he was telling the story to, decided to tell us the story in this book. But I want you to think about Jangles and his dad in this story, and what was it that you think David Shannon wanted you to learn through Jangles and that man? So what was it that the man had to do in order to set Jangles free? So think about, like, what can we learn from this? And then what you're going to do is you're going to go back to Seesaw, and you're going to tell your teacher your what the moral was of the story. Okay, so don't forget to do that after you watch this video. I hope you enjoyed the book. I think this is probably one of my favorite books by David Shannon. I love this story, and it has a really good moral to it. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think. And I know your other teachers are excited too, so we hope you enjoyed the book.